All right, so let's get started on the topic today, boundaries. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Boundaries are the most important thing when it comes to breaking the cycle of toxic relationships. And if you're anything like me, when I got out of a toxic relationship, let's just not say the number here, I had a bunch of them, and I really did not know anything about boundaries. I had to basically learn what boundaries were from scratch. So that's what we're going to go into today. What exactly boundaries are, what they have to do with self-love, because they actually have a ton to do with self-love. I'm going to share a little bit of my spiritual perspective as far as how boundaries look from that spiritual angle and how to actually do them. So, what are boundaries? This word might be new to you. Like I said, if you haven't heard it before. If this is new to you, let me know if you haven't heard of boundaries before. So boundaries are essentially your limits. What you are okay with and what you are not okay with. What feels good to you and what does not feel good to you. It's basically your no. It's what you do not want to tolerate in a relationship. So, one of the main reasons we end up in toxic relationships, and this was the case for me, absolutely, is because we don't have very good boundaries. We're either not aware of what our boundaries are, or we're not very good at enforcing them. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, how to identify what your boundaries are and how to actually put them into practice. So when I came out of my toxic relationships, as I said, I didn't know anything about boundaries. I had to learn about them basically from scratch. And when I did, I had this huge aha moment, like, oh yeah, that's why I ended up in these relationships, because I didn't have very good boundaries. I wasn't aware of what my limits were, and if I did, I kind of like talked myself out of it. I kind of gaslighted myself in a way. I said, well, I don't feel okay about this, but maybe other people wouldn't be bothered by it, and so I should just let it go. So that's not how boundaries work. So how do we actually know what our boundaries are? Because this is the first step in having good, solid boundaries. It's knowing what they actually are. So what I recommend doing is to take some time, set some deliberate time aside to get super clear on what your boundaries are. You may already know what they are. You may know, all right, you know what? If someone cheats on me, that's not acceptable. That is a deal breaker. That's my limit. I'm going to end the relationship. It could be something as big as that, or it could be something as small as like, you know what? If this person doesn't have the same values as me, if they don't believe in XYZ, that's my boundary too. This isn't going to be a good relationship for me. Boundaries are a very personal thing. They don't have to be, like when I talk about boundaries, I say boundaries are not a democracy. They are very personal to you. Now, all of that being said, you might actually not know what your boundaries are. And that's a whole other thing. We're going to talk about that more at the end of the live here. But like if you're someone that works with me, like for my clients, I give them a list of red flags, and that's something you can go off of to see, oh, okay, this is what boundaries look like, and these are the things that I personally want to adopt as my boundaries. Things like no name calling, no abuse of any kind, no inconsistencies with someone's feelings or how they show up for you. Things like that. So take some time to really sit with yourself and think about, what am I going to tolerate in my relationships and what am I unwilling to tolerate? And I actually recommend to make a list. Make a very concrete black and white list of the things that are your limits that you will not accept in relationships. So that's the first step. The other thing about boundaries is you might actually not know all of them in the moment. And that's okay too. Boundaries are also an evolving thing. So you might be dating someone and something happens that wasn't actually on your list of boundaries, but you're realizing, oh, you know what? I really didn't like this. I'm not okay with this. Here's a new boundary for me. So you can add that to your list. So boundaries can come in two forms. The ones that you already know are not acceptable for you, and then the ones that you discover as you continue to date someone or get to know someone. So ladies, let me know if this is making sense here so far. That's the first step. I'm going to just see, I see some comments here. So Erin's asking, what if someone's boundaries are that they refuse to speak to you and want you to have no contact with them? So Erin, I'm curious about the context of this. Is this in a relationship, like you guys are together and this person has said they don't want to have contact with you? Or is this someone that the relationship is ended and they're asking that? Because there's different advice there for those two different situations. So let me know here in the comments. Okay, so first step to having ultra clear, really solid boundaries is knowing what your boundaries are. The second step, and this can sometimes be the hardest step, is giving yourself permission to have them. Let me know, or give me a heart or give me a like, if you actually know your boundaries, but sometimes it feels really hard to let yourself have them. This was the case for me. I eventually did, in my step of recovery, figure out that, okay, I had these boundaries, they were XYZ, but then I struggled with giving myself permission to have them because my background was someone who wanted to be very accommodating. I wanted to be very easygoing, going with the flow, and it felt like having these boundaries was like I'm not supposed to have them. Like, aren't I causing problems for people by having these boundaries? Let me know if you've ever felt this. The answer is no. The answer is absolutely not. You're not causing problems for people when you have boundaries. Healthy people actually want you to have boundaries. When I first realized this, because I was talking to my partner at the time, and he's like, yeah, one of the reasons I actually was attracted to you is because you do have really good boundaries. And I was shocked. I was like, I thought this was something that people actually would just have to tolerate about me. They would just have to accept. He said, no, it actually feels really good because I have my own boundaries that I want respected. And when you're with someone who doesn't have boundaries, it doesn't feel like a safe relationship. It actually doesn't feel like a very honest relationship because it feels like most people who are healthy and have a good perspective on relationships, they know that there are going to be things that are okay for you and things that are not okay for you. And they want to know that. And if you're not sharing that, if you're not expressing that, they don't have a great feeling about the relationship. It feels a little bit dishonest. It doesn't feel good to them. So boundaries are actually needed. They're necessary to have a healthy relationship. So let me address these comments here. So Suzanne is saying, it was uncomfortable for me to state my boundaries at first. Yeah, but the more I did this, the easier it was to recognize toxic behaviors in others. Exactly. It's still something I have to be very intentional about. Yeah, Suzanne, thank you for sharing this. Yes, this is exactly how it works, and that's actually another one of my steps that we're going to talk about. It's practice. Thank you for sharing that. Sandra's saying here, I'm not good at enforcing them, so in order to not look like my word means nothing, I tend to not have any at all. Sandra, thank you also for bringing this up. I'm going to address that too. This can also be one of the hardest parts of boundaries, is actually enforcing them. Yeah, I need a lot of help in this area. I'm working on it. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, you need to have these boundaries in order to have a healthy relationship, because a relationship cannot thrive when you are not able to express your wants and your needs and your limits. It's just not going to happen. It won't be a fulfilling relationship. It won't feel like a safe relationship. So please do give yourself permission to have these. Now, if you're with someone who is making you feel like your limits are wrong or like you're crazy for having these limits, I talked to someone the other day, and they were telling me that their partner was telling them that their perfectly reasonable limit was not okay because other people don't have that same limit. They don't have that same boundary. So she should just forget about her limit and just be okay with his behavior. Again, this is not what boundaries are. Boundaries are not a democracy. We don't have to vote. The population does not get input on your boundaries. It's very personal. So if you're with someone who is not respecting your boundaries or who is making you feel bad for having them or even crazy, this is a giant red flag. How someone treats your boundaries is a huge indicator of how healthy the relationship is going to be. If they are accepting of your boundaries when you share them and they go, oh, all right, great, I won't do that anymore, or I'll do this differently, or whatever it is, awesome. That means you have a very good basis for a healthy relationship. If the behavior is anything other than that, like I said, if it's making fun of them, if it's dismissing your boundaries, if it's trying to talk you out of them, that's another thing that happens in toxic relationships, trying to convince you that your boundaries are not okay, big, big, big red flag. And it's an indicator that this is not going to be a healthy relationship. And if that is happening, my advice is to address it once, say something like, hey, you know what? I felt sad when you said this about my boundaries. And then ask for it to be different. Next time, how would you feel about not doing that? Or state whatever behavior that you're looking for to happen. See if it continues. If it continues, it is highly unlikely that that behavior is going to change, and I would recommend exiting that relationship. It's not going to be a healthy relationship if boundaries are not respected. Okay, so that is the second step, giving yourself permission to have them. We absolutely need to have them in order to have a healthy relationship. The third step of how to have boundaries is to practice. Like Sandra was saying, Suzanne was saying, you have to practice these. It's not like you're going to make your list of boundaries and then wake up the next day and boop, 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 be able to just have the best boundaries in the world. It doesn't work like that, because often setting boundaries, and we maybe not have even known of what boundaries were, what the word was, what the concept was, but just expressing our needs probably was difficult for us, and maybe still continues to be difficult for us, like Sandra was saying. So this is not something that's just going to change overnight. It's something you have to practice. And what I recommend to my clients, to the women I work with, is to take baby steps when it comes to boundaries. If you have not really been great at setting boundaries, take a tiny little baby step and set a mini boundary. So what is a mini boundary? So this could be something like declining an invitation to a party that you're just really not interested in going to. If you've never done it, it could feel really scary at first. So you set that boundary. You say something like, oh, I just can't make it. I'd love to attend, but I'm busy that night. Something very polite, but firm in that you will not be able to attend. And then you sit with all that discomfort. That's the hard part of boundaries. It's going to be uncomfortable at first. So you set that small baby step boundary. You sit with all the stuff that comes up. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's fear, stories of like, oh no, are they not going to like me now? What's going to happen? Are they going to end the friendship with me? All of these things that tend to come up when we set a boundary. And then what we will usually find is that these feelings resolve and we actually feel really good because we've taken our power back essentially. We have set a limit. We haven't abandoned ourselves. We've done what feels like is the right thing for us to do. And that is how we increase our confidence and our self-love. So I said I was going to mention how this related to self-love. Boundaries are a critical part of self-love, in addition to helping you break the cycle of toxic relationships. Because when we are ignoring our limits, we are essentially abandoning ourselves. It's not a good feeling to stuff our limits down, to step over ourselves and do the thing that we don't want to do anyway. That is the opposite of self-love. So when we start to honor ourselves, when we start to honor what our limits are, what our no is, that's when we really, really start to love ourselves. So boundaries and self-love are like this. They go hand in hand. So if you are someone who really wants to focus on loving themselves more, start with setting boundaries. It's a key here for self-love. So again, practice. Practice is what makes this easier. Like Suzanne was saying, the more that she practices, the easier it gets to set these boundaries. So let's say that you have set that limit, you've done that little baby step, and now you're ready for something bigger. Then you start to move on to the boundary situations that are a bit more challenging. That could be maybe communicating you're upset with the person you're dating, sharing that what they did wasn't okay. Things like that. Those are more of a higher level boundary activity. So the third step is to practice, do the baby steps, and work your way up to the big boundaries. Some of the ones that were hardest for me had to do with my family, actually. Friendships were relatively easy. Romantic relationships, a little bit harder. With my family, those were some of the hardest boundaries to set. And I think because it's just those patterns run very deep. And so when you're showing up with your family to set boundaries, the patterns, the ways that we interact as a family have been going on for a long time. And when someone comes in to set a boundary, it shakes that up. And people often aren't ready for that. And it can take some time for them to shift and to come to accept the new reality. So Suzanne is saying here, I learned a lot about others when I set and followed through with a boundary. Yes, exactly. You will learn a lot. I'm going to talk about this too. I used to be so worried about making others upset with me, but I was the one who ended up suffering with this kind of mindset. This is so true, Suzanne. I'm so glad you're bringing this up. When I did finally get comfortable setting small boundaries, I then set the bigger ones. Yep. It caused me so much anxiety at first, but after some practice, I began to feel so much peace and strength. Suzanne, thank you so much for your comment. Yeah, you're basically saying exactly what I said. It takes that practice. You got to do the baby steps first, move through all that fear and all that anxiety that comes up whenever you do something new. And then on the other side of that fear and anxiety is the new you who has those clear, strong boundaries, and it feels so much better. And I'm so glad to hear that you're experiencing that. The peace that you feel so much stronger. You have literally taken your power back, and you are a different person when you're setting boundaries. And yeah, you will learn a lot about people. That's why I mentioned in what I said previously about how someone respects your boundaries, how they treat your boundaries is a huge data point that can be very helpful in figuring out if this is the right relationship for you. So yes, I'm so glad to hear that. All right, so step number 4 here in this process of how do we actually set boundaries is being assertive, but not aggressive. So this comes with practice. If we've been in a lot of toxic relationships and we went from having no boundaries, sometimes we can swing to the opposite extreme where we have these really, really aggressive boundaries because we don't want to get hurt. We swing from having none to having ones that are a little bit too harsh and too strong. Now, what I mean by this is not to erode your own personal boundaries, but what I mean is in the way we deliver them. So if we had no boundaries, we can swing from just accepting and tolerating everything to being really harsh with how we deliver those. Like, no, that's not acceptable for me. If you do that, you're out. I'm out. That would be an aggressive way of communicating a boundary, and it's not necessary for most situations. If your life is in danger, if this is a life-threatening thing, yes, do whatever you need to do. But in most cases, it's not. So what we need to practice here is to learn how to communicate those boundaries in a way where you're not being too harsh with your words and you're also being clear and firm. Because if you are being aggressive, it's going to feel really harsh to people. It's going to feel like a punishment. And that's not what we want our boundaries to feel like. We want them to feel like, hey, here's my limit, and that's what it is, and I still like you, and everything is okay for now, as long as you respect them. We don't want them to come across as too harsh. We can be assertive, and we can also be clear and kind. That's the ideal that we're going for. Assertive, clear, and kind. So what does this look like in practice? So what this looks like is first expressing how something made you feel. So let's say your partner or someone you're dating didn't call you when they said that they would. So next time you talk to them, you say something like, hey, I felt sad when you didn't call me, when you said you would, on whatever day it was and whatever time it was. How would you feel about making sure that you call me when you say you will. And then you leave it up to them. You see what they say. Maybe they'll say something like, oh gosh, you're right. I'm so sorry. I had this thing going on and I just completely forgot. It slipped my mind. I will make sure that the next time I say I'll call you, I will. And then you watch. You watch and you see if that person will follow through. If they follow through, great. You could have a really great relationship partner. If they don't, if they continue to say that they will call and then don't call, that's when you know that this person may not be the right person for you. Because one of the things I teach about avoiding toxic relationships is making sure that someone's actions match their words. So just things like that. If you're noticing things and you have expressed to this person your limits, how you felt, and what you would like instead, and they're not able to respect that, good sign that this might not be the person for you. So is this making sense so far? Ladies, let me know. Let me know if you want some more examples of how to set a assertive but kind boundary. And I'll talk some more about that. Really the format that we're going for here is to express how you feel, not necessarily what they did wrong, because that's going to come across as a criticism. It's going to feel harsh. And again, that's not what we're aiming for here. If you are expressing how something made you feel, that's a way where you're being very clear, like, I wasn't okay with this. This is a limit for me. I felt sad, anxious, scared, whatever it is. And here's what I would like to be different. Here's what I would like you to do instead. So your feelings plus a positive statement is a very good way to express a boundary. Okay, good. So it's making sense so far. Awesome. So that was step 4, learning how to be assertive but also kind in your boundaries, unless it's a life-threatening situation, and then all bets are off here. The last step here, when it comes to how to set boundaries in your life with people, is to be willing to enforce the consequences. And I know Sandra was talking about this, how difficult this can be. This can be one of the hardest parts of setting boundaries, because it's all well and good for us to know what they are, but if we're unable to actually honor them, we may as well not have any boundaries. And that goes for the relationships that we do have. If we tell someone this is our boundary and then we don't honor that and we don't respect that within ourselves, then the other person will probably not respect our boundaries either. They're going to think we're just all talk and no action. And so when that's happening, it's really not a good dynamic either for a relationship. The boundaries are meaningless if you're not able to enforce the consequences. Again, this is the hardest part because it means that sometimes the relationship has to end. If, for example, one of your boundaries was, I am not okay with my partner messaging other women on Instagram, and you've expressed that, you've expressed how it makes you feel and what you'd like them to do differently, and it still continues. If we're being loving of ourselves and if we're being honoring of ourselves and respecting ourselves, that means we have to end the relationship. And that's hard. That's hard. We don't want to do that. We want the person to respect our boundaries. We want them to honor how it makes us feel and what we want them to do instead. We don't want to leave the relationship because that's going to be painful. It's going to be uncomfortable for us. So what I can tell you is it's worth that discomfort of leaving a relationship where you're not feeling honored, where your boundaries are not being respected. Yes, it's going to be temporarily uncomfortable. It's going to hurt for a little while. It's going to feel scary for a little while. But you are going to be much better off in a relationship where your boundaries are honored, where your boundaries are respected, where someone is working just as hard as you to make the relationship healthy. So this is really boundaries in a nutshell. These are your boundary basics here. If you have any specific topics that you want me to address when it comes to boundaries, put them in the comments or message me and I'll try to create another live training based on specific questions you have about boundaries here. But to sum this up, if someone is not respecting your boundaries, that is a huge red flag, and that is when you need to walk away. This is how you break the cycle of toxic relationships. You know your boundaries, you communicate them, You express them, and if someone is not honoring them, that's it. Bye. It's a massive red flag when someone doesn't honor your boundaries. So here's the thing also. Here's this other thing that happens with boundaries that I want to talk about, and it's something that I've come to realize in the work that I do with women who are wanting to heal from toxic relationships, get over their toxic exes, and then get into healthy relationships. One of the things that happens is often we don't know what our own boundaries are. So why does this happen? Why do we often not know what they are? Well, it's often because they are buried. They are buried under layers of emotional baggage. So if you've been in a lot of toxic relationships, or you've experienced a lot of abuse when you were younger, and maybe not even a lot, maybe even just a little, our sense of what is not okay for us can just be buried in our subconscious because we pushed it down so long ago in order to stay safe in our relationships. Let me know if you guys have experienced this. This is the case for me. Again, I was someone that wanted to be really accommodating. And so I pushed down my no so far that I got into these bad relationships because I wasn't even aware of what was okay for me and what wasn't okay. Because in order to survive my earlier years, I had to do that. Otherwise, the cognitive dissonance would have been too great. And I don't know what would have happened, but I probably wouldn't have stayed relatively sane in my younger years. So what I have found is that we cannot know what our boundaries are because we just haven't done the healing work. And so quite often when I work with the women in my programs, the women in my program, we uncover their no. We uncover their boundaries after we do a lot of the healing work. It's not something that they come in knowing inherently. I mean, we go through the red flag list and they can know what they are on an objective level, but before we do the healing work, they're not feeling that no, if that makes sense. And you may have experienced this in your relationships, like things that you look back on. If you've done some healing work, you may look back on what you tolerated in the past and go like, I can't believe I was okay with that. How was I okay with that? How did that not trigger my no? Well, it's because that no could have been buried. It could have been buried, like I said, under a lot of emotional baggage. And so once I start to clear that stuff from the women that I work with, they are much more able to access that no. That feeling like this is not okay. I need to set a limit here. Whereas before, it wasn't so easy. So yeah, I'm curious if you have experienced this. I was working with this on one of my clients actually recently because she was starting to go back out there and date. She had come from a lot of toxic relationships and she wasn't very clear when we started working together on what her no actually was. She couldn't actually feel it. And I think you guys know what I mean. If you have experienced this, when you hit a no, you can feel it. It feels like no. You can feel that within your body. And so she wasn't having a lot of that when we started out working together. And then through the work that we did, she was able to feel that no. And when she went out there and started dating, she was actually able to dodge a lot of bullets because she felt that no, communicated her limits, and when someone didn't respect them, she left. And so now she has a really great relationship. But the point is, it did take some work to get to the point where she could feel that no within her. And it was very similar for me too. My no wasn't always readily available. I had to do some work, some releasing work to be able to access that. So if you feel like this is something you're struggling with, if you're not sure what your limits are, if you're not sure what your no is, and if this looks like being in relationships where you see objectively the red flags, but they don't feel bad to you, please reach out to me. And because this is something that I do work on in my program, and doing the releasing work can really help you to much better access your internal limits, your feeling of no. So just send me a message if that's something you're curious about. So yeah, Suzanne is saying here, it is more of a challenge for me to set boundaries with family members. Yeah, that's some of the hardest boundaries I think that you can set. Those are like if we're talking about levels here, baby steps is like declining an invitation to a party. Mastery level is setting limits with your family members. If you can set them with your family members, I think you can walk away saying, you know what, yeah, I've really mastered boundaries here. And family members, it's not always a guarantee that they're going to accept them either. And that's a good data point to have. If family members are consistently not respecting your boundaries, maybe you don't want to spend a lot of time with them anymore. Maybe you keep yourself at a distance. So getting these data points when it comes to boundaries is really important for all sorts of relationships. I'm primarily talking here about romantic relationships, but it applies to all of your relationships across the board. Friends, family, coworkers, you name it, it applies. So that's all that I had for you ladies today. I hope this was really helpful, and thank you all for participating in the poll that I put up last week. I'm going to have some really good live trainings coming up for you guys this month and next month. So yeah, let me leave this on a second just to make sure that you guys don't have any other questions here. So I see Sandra has a question here. Hold on, let me get some water here. But yeah, feel free to drop in your questions here. So the question is, what if they agree to accommodate your boundary but make mistakes regarding it? How often do you allow mistakes regarding accommodating our boundaries? These are great questions. I have unintentionally crossed others' boundaries before, of course. Of course, I always hold myself accountable and apologize. This is a great question, Sandra. And the way I look at this is, I don't see it as like, these are the rules. The rules are, if they do this 3 times, then you have to leave. I think it's a very personal decision. What I have done, I can share what I've done myself. So if I've set a boundary and I see that there is effort on behalf of the other person in trying to respect it, trying to accommodate me, and they're just still figuring out how to actually do it, maybe they need some more feedback from me, I'm okay with that. As long as I see consistent progress, as long as things are trending in an upward direction, they're getting better, personally, I'm okay with it. Because what this means to me is someone that is willing to work on it and to accommodate me, it means they have a couple things. It means they have self-awareness, means they're aware that this is not a thing that's okay and they need to do something differently, and that they have the ability to do it, which means that they respect me and they are willing to accommodate me, to accommodate my feelings. So I see a lot of good things with this if someone is working on it. At the same time, if in my life I have someone who they're trying for a long time and it's really not getting better, and maybe the effort is not where I think it should be or where I would like it to be, and things are not really changing, then that's a different story. That's definitely something to consider. Again, I don't think this is not black and white. This is entirely personal here. What are you okay with and what are you not okay with? Are you okay with someone who is trying? Maybe they're not getting it 100%, but they're getting better. Or is it not okay? And I think this would depend on the boundary too. If your boundary is, I don't want this person to cheat on me, and they're trying, but they're still not getting it, they're still cheating on you, I would say that that's not something you should stick around for. If it's something like this person leaves their socks on the floor and I've asked them not to, and they're trying, and sometimes they do remember, and sometimes they don't remember, but they apologize, that's very different. So it's really dependent on the situation, Sandra, and I thank you so much for asking that question. That's a really great question. I think it's entirely personal on what you're willing to tolerate. It's another boundary. It's another level of boundary. Okay, let me just go through here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, I think I've addressed all the questions. So ladies, thank you so much for watching. Like I say every week, if you have additional topics that you want me to cover, let me know, put it in the comments, send me a message, because I do appreciate your feedback, because I want to create these trainings to help you with the specific things that you're struggling with in the process of healing from toxic relationships and learning how to create healthy ones. So Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys next week with a new topic. All right, take care.